Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. So we got brand new banners for Arlecchino and Zhongli, and you're probably wondering, should I pull on these banners? No. But in case you're still here for the rest of the video, let's talk about what's going on with these banners. So let's start with Arlecchino actually, and the way I would describe Arlecchino is she is good enough the character. Like everything about her is just good enough for the current gameplay, the current endgame, and all this stuff. If or when Arlecchino really does fall off in terms of her DPS and performance and she's not able to complete endgame content, well, things are going to be looking pretty rough for a lot of the characters in the game. Do you enjoy wasting monies on Primo Gems like I do? Well, I waste money at a 10 to 25% discount thanks to today's sponsor, Lootbar.gg. By just purchasing this $100 Genesis Crystals pack, I saved up to 25% off constellations that I may never activate, like my Arlecchino constellations. And why stop there? If you play any other gacha games like Honkai Star Rail, Zenless Zone Zero, and Wuthering Waves, Lootbar.gg lets you save big on all of these big titles. And heck, there are a ton of other titles as well, which I'm just learning about now, and I guess I'll have to use Lootbar for from now on. Sporting a 4.9 star rating on Trustpilot, and having personally used Lootbar many times now, saving money on both daddies on these banners has never been easier. Just select the package you want, input your Genshin user ID, swipe that credit card, and bam! In very little time, you'll get your Genesis Crystals. New users get a 10% off coupon, and returning users have a high chance of getting a 5% off coupon by smashing that link down below. And there's also the limited discount on the 8080 Genesis Crystals package that you don't want to miss. Huge thanks to Lootbar for sponsoring today's video. Things are already looking pretty rough for a lot of the characters, but Arlecchino is kind of one of those benchmarks where we gotta be a lot more concerned. So yeah, typically when it comes to Arlecchino, especially at Constellation 0 power levels, she tends to be my go-to character for clearing Stygian Onslaught on Fearless and various different fights, because she's typically generally able to always handle it, and she's got just enough power level to do that. Now about Arlecchino, of course, she is a Pyro main DPS character with a reasonable amount of team building flexibility. She works really well in Overloaded, she works well with Sitlali Melt, she works pretty well with Vaporize, and she even has a new kind of archetype with Overvape with Anefa. And Arlecchino's whole gimmick is that she does Bond of Life stuff. The more Bond of Life that she has, the more damage that her basic attacks will do. And yeah, this gimmick was used basically just for 2 characters only, which might be a record for how few characters took advantage of a gimmick that they added that's supposed to span across, multiple characters. And no, I don't really count Sigewinne as taking advantage of the Bond of Life mechanic because, yeah, okay. So anyway, one more thing about Arlecchino that you do need to know is that she literally cannot be healed because, well, if you could heal her, you could remove her Bond of Life, which would suck for her damage output. And in order for her to heal, she needs to use her Elemental Burst. Some people don't really like that playstyle gimmick for her because healers obviously offer a lot of comfort for you in terms of gameplay, and you have to obviously dance around that when it comes to Arlecchino. Now, Arlecchino does have quite a few interesting advantages due to her Bond of Life mechanic, because she can kind of store up some Bond of Life for the next rotation. She can build up a little bit extra Bond of Life each time. This means that she can indeed also front load some additional damage, and Arlecchino is one of the characters who actually gets a little bit stronger the more rotations that you do, which is a bit unusual in terms of, well, how most characters tend to operate in Genshin Impact. Another big advantage to Arlecchino is that she is energy independent unless, well, you need to heal, or unless, I guess, you have Constellation 6 Arlecchino, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Because of this, she only needs her elemental skill, and she's able to generate a bunch of pyro particles to funnel to a character like, for example, Bennett. So fortunately, in content like Stygian Onslaught, she has a very good ramp up time in comparison to most energy dependent characters who, well, they need to build up their burst. But not Arlecchino. Nope, she's fine without her burst at all. And Arlecchino is honestly a bit tied to the hip with Bennett. She was designed and balanced around the fact that Bennett exists. And even though Bennett doesn't heal Arlecchino, obviously the massive attack buffs, as well as, whatever other potential buffs he might provide, are fantastic for Arlecchino. And another detail about Arlecchino that I think is worth mentioning is that her AoE isn't particularly great. It's not horrible, but it's also like not fantastic. But with Stygian Onslaught these days, you know, AoE is not that important. It's been mainly a one-on-one slugfest against the boss. Although, you know, some enemies do have a little bit of AoE mechanics, like everyone's favorite Lightkeeper. Now let's talk about why you perhaps shouldn't pull for Arlecchino. And the number one biggest reason is that Mavuika exists. And Mavuika is literally bigger, better, and stronger in pretty much every single situation. You would need a Pyro main DPS character as long as you have one other decent character for Mavuika, who also, those characters tend to be some of Arlecchino's best teammate options as well. And yeah, I mean, the fact that Mavuika exists and so many people have Mavuika makes Arlecchino a difficult sell, because, well, you're going to have to invest more into Arlecchino for her to, you know, kind of compete with Mavuika. Now the community has really wrestled with Mavuika's motorcycle. They've discovered insane combos that increase Mavuika's damage by even more, making Mavuika honestly a much sweatier character than she used to be. She used to just be donuts go burr, but now she's like, okay, well, I got to do these fighting game combos with pretty somewhat precise timings in order to optimize my Mavuika's damage. But of course, Mavuika doesn't need to do those combos, and she's still already pretty much the best character in the game. But with the combos, she's even further ahead the best character in the game. Arlecchino, she's pretty much Unga Boonga. You just do N1, N2, N3, or you can just mash the left mouse button all the way through, and it doesn't really matter that much. You know, the damage optimization is pretty small for Arlecchino in comparison to Mavuika. Overall, Arlecchino is a much less sweatier character than Mavuika in terms of combo potential, although Mavuika can be played, you know, to be very not sweaty with just donuts. But again, if you want to optimize Mavuika, it's a lot more sweaty. So, however, despite that, Arlecchino is sweaty in the sense that you cannot just willy-nilly take a bunch of damage. There are some elements where Arlecchino is more sweaty than Mavuika. And finally, we have Durin literally right around the corner, who's another Pyro character. We're gonna have to see how he works, but you know, newer tends to be better in Genshin Impact's meta these days. And we even have Alice, who is coming up eventually, and who knows, maybe she'll be a Pyro character that could potentially power creep Mavuika. We'll have to see. Okay, now to answer some more questions, what about Arlecchino's signature weapon? This thing has one of the best drips in the entire game because it literally transforms into a scythe. And in terms of whether or not, you know, it's a pretty good upgrade or not, a lot of people have the Primordial Jadewing Spear, or for example, the Staff of Homa, or many of the other 5-star stat stick options, at which point her signature weapon is not nearly as big of an upgrade. But if you are using something like the White Tassel, or God forbid the Missive Wind Spear or something, then the signature weapon is a pretty worthwhile upgrade for your Arlecchino. But generally speaking, Arlecchino's Constellation 1 is going to be much more recommended because, well, it just improves the value that her Bond of Light provides significantly. I believe roughly around 30% boost to her damage. And I'm assuming it's additive in these calcs. These calcs are also quite old, so, you know, it's been a long time, and, you know, haven't really proofread them enough for me to be like super confident in them. But here's just some calcs for you guys to take a look at. Now, in terms of the rest of our constellations, Constellation 2, I think a lot of the community actually sleeps on because it provides a front-loaded nuke, and the way you execute it is you simply do a dash cancel to cancel the charged attacks animation. And then Constellation 6 Refinement 5 Arlecchino is actually still a fantastic whale character, ranking 3rd in, you know, DHC WSP and I's 9.2 million hit point challenge. But you can also see here that a 4-person Arlecchino team is losing to a 3-person Mavuika team in the whale level, really highlighting just how ridiculously powerful Mavuika is at all levels of investment. So yeah, my advice in terms of Arlecchino, she's one of the characters who reruns who I would say she's good enough to, if you want to pull her and you feel like you like her a lot, I'm not going to tell you it's a terrible idea, because Arlecchino still strong enough to clear most of the endgame content. Okay, let's talk about the next character, Zhongli. Amazing memes aside, Zhongli is still, in my opinion, I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I still think he's overall the best shielder in the game. 12-second cooldown on his elemental skill with 20% uptime and a very, very thick general usage shield. Very importantly, it provides 20% universal resistance shred to nearby enemies. And he does enable the Archaic Petra as well as the Tenacity of Millith, but the Archaic Petra is obviously well known for how clunky and unwieldy and unusable it effectively is. And Zhongli's pillars honestly only really exist nowadays to provide crystallize, as well as to trigger, for example, tenacity of the Millilith buffs. And people forget, but you can also use the microwave strategy with Zhongli. I do not recommend it. It is funny, but it is not good. And Zhongli's burst actually petrifies. You may have forgotten about this. I almost forgot about this. But then I remembered, oh yeah, his burst petrifies and basically freezes enemies for a little bit of time. But the duration is so short, the damage these days is practically negligible, the animation is incredibly long, and it doesn't even work on most of the important enemies like bosses and stuff, so it's just not something, unfortunately, that people use or recommend these days. Now, the next thing about Zhongli is that there is a non-negligible chance that he might get faction buffs, so in my opinion, Zhongli is a candidate to be buffed, but do not poll based on that. They might rerun him again in the future, and even if not, I can't imagine him being buffed being like, you know, stronger than, for example, people that invested a bunch of currency or resources into their DPS Navias as an example, should Zhongli come for their job as a Geo DPS character. There's a lot of cons when it comes to Zhongli. First of all, his pillars can be deleted by fatties like bosses, and his pillars by today's standards have microscopic range, so yeah, pretty unreliable in terms of their, you know, reliability, their ability to activate tenacity, etc, etc. DPS was not nearly as important because, for example, you know, your character teams would do like, I don't know, like 60k DPS, and you would only need 30k to clear Abyss 12. That's just not the case these days. Zhongli in those situations was fantastic because even if he dropped your team's DPS from like 60 to 50k, well, you can still output that 50k DPS very, very easily. And that was the thing that made him so reliably used for so long. But you can see here in the Abyss usage rates that as the HP pools increase, Zhongli's usage severely decreases because the more HP, the more DPS you need. And therefore, Zhongli being a DPS loss on pretty much any team that he's on leads to this phenomena. And nowadays, shielders just have to provide a lot more than a small, well, frankly, 20% resistance shred with very, very clunky artifact usage. For example, a Nepha provides pretty reasonable shields and tons of lunar charge damage, both dealing with the mechanic aspects of countering enemies that require lunar charge, as well as just doing a ton of damage herself. Then we have Citlali's flimsier shield, but it's still functional enough for, you know, a shield purpose for many situations. And she provides a big damage boost either through Thrilling Tales, through Cinder City, as well as the Resistance Shred, and very importantly, she applies the perfect amount of cryo for characters like Mavuika to melt very comfortably, and in an AoE, which makes, you know, Citlali obviously one of the best characters in the game. Ironically, on Zhongli's banner, we even have Lanyan, who provides potentially bigger shields in many situations, and, you know, she can equip the Thrilling Tales and Viridescent Veneer, which are two things that are much easier to use than, for example, Archaic Petra that Zhongli might provide. So it's kind of ironic that even on his own banner, he's being power crept by a character that people don't even use, Lanyan. Let's talk about Zhongli's constellations. Look, these things are super terrible. I'm not even going to talk about any of them because that is just how bad they are. So yeah, please buff them, Hoyoverse. Now, finally, my advice on Zhongli, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I just don't recommend pulling him in today's meta. Even if he's a character that you like, I cannot in good faith recommend it. Unless like you're just fine with, you know, just looking at his pretty face and wondering about Osmanthus wine and how it tastes, then yeah, sure, go ahead. You know, you do you, whatever you find fun on your account. But for the endgame content, I do not recommend pulling for him. Okay, let's quickly go through the 4-star characters featured on this banner. Next, we have Yunjin, and she basically just provides flat damage buffs to normal attack, so she's a buffer for normal attack characters, but that's where the good ends. Yunjin has major energy issues, which makes her pretty hard to build and pretty hard to use in all honesty, and this is one of the reasons why no one uses her, and even in her ideal scenarios, she's not even like better than, for example, characters like Bennett, and Bennett heals too. So Yunjin is a character who I would describe as barely usable with Yoimiya, Ayato, and I guess Arlecchino. But yeah, I mean, that's where the good ends, and there's always a better option than Yunjin. So honestly, I actively recommend against pulling for her as well as building her, unless you just need a paperweight for Imaginarium Theater. Next character is Rosaria, and things are a little bit better for Rosaria, but Rosaria is basically a cryo budget option. She's the character that a lot of content creators like myself utilize in Abyss 12 clears as a budget team, budget free-to-play friendly character, because she's very functional for that purpose. She just applies a very reasonable amount of cryo in a radial AoE, and she also provides a small crit rate buff to characters that sit in her circle. Of course, she has circle impact issues, and she's completely outshined by supports like Sitlali, who is obviously a very popular character. Rosaria is one of these characters who you will definitely bench once you get a character like Sitlali. And in terms of Rosaria's constellations, her constellation 2 is pretty decent. And her other constellations honestly don't really matter. 20% physical resistance shred. Okay, now we're pulling out the big guns here. In my opinion, Rosaria is a transition character at best. I don't really recommend pulling for Rosaria unless you're kind of a new player and just want some kind of cryo application that's reasonable for your Mavuika. But hey, I mean, you even have Kaya for that purpose, so yeah, just not really worth the Primo Gems in my opinion. Now, the next character is Lanyan, and she is another Animo Catalyst user. We just can't get enough. Hoiverse loves this archetype, but she is Viridescent Vener for the artifacts, of course, 40% resistance shred. Plus, she's able to equip the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers. Unfortunately, Sucrose also does this exact same thing, but Sucrose also provides a lot more elemental mastery. But Lanyan provides that pretty thick shield. So situationally, Lanyan's shield can be one of the thickest shields in the game because she can absorb an element, and when you have an elemental shield, it infuses her shield with that element, and once you have an elemental shield, it absorbs that element's worth of damage by 2.5 times more efficiently. And her Constellation 2 even makes her shield refresh, but honestly, I don't know why we're talking about the size of someone's shield. I mean, this just doesn't matter, right? It's not about the size, it's about how you use it. Lanyan's shield is definitely overcompensating in terms of size. You just don't need such a thick shield. However, Lanyan does do a ton of little hits, as we've seen in this stage in Onslaught. She's quite usable for breaking the Hera's shield, as well as some other goofy things like the Papuya or whatever it's called. Now, in terms of her Constellation, Constellation 2 provides that thicker shield that I mentioned. Constellation 4 gives a 60 elemental mastery buff, which is a pretty small buff, but hey, I mean, we'll take it. Constellation 6 gives her an extra elemental skill, typically not necessary at all, but useful for example, doing a lot of little hits against an enemy like the Hera. Overall, in my opinion, Lanyan is a mid to low value character, but she's not useless. There's just a lot of competition like Sucrose and Kazuha, Shenyun, etc., etc. So overall, I don't really recommend pulling for her, but hey, if you get her, it's not that bad. Next, let's talk about the weapon banner, starting with everyone's favorite weapon, the Vortex Vanquisher. And this thing is absolutely, I'm not gonna, you know what? I'm not gonna be the guy that says this thing is shit, because while it might be, it's like, look, it's just a very, very mid stat stick. Okay, I realize I spent way too much time yapping in the first edit, so here we go. We're just going to take a look at a little bit of math for Arlecchino. We can see that this thing, if you're shielded, performs just a few percentage points better than the white tassel, and without shield, it's even worse than the white tassel. This is assuming Bennett buffs as well, so yeah, do keep that in mind. But yeah, not a good stat stick even for Arlecchino. And on a character like Flynn's, it looks a little bit better because Flynn's teams don't typically have massive attack buffs. And as such, the Vortex Vanquisher, when shielded, is at around 80% of his signature weapon, which is, 5%-ish better than the Prospector Shovel. So yeah, it's a little bit better than the free-to-play friendly option, but basically this is just typically a minor upgrade from free-to-play friendly options. I also forgot to go over the mechanics of it, but basically you got to hit an enemy a bunch in order to max out the attack buff that it provides, and if you're shielded, the attack buff is jacked up even more. On top of that, the Vortex Vanquisher has attack percent as a sub stat as well, so this thing just provides a ton of attack percent and not much else. Overall, I do not recommend this weapon. Next, we have Arlecchino's signature weapon, and this thing mainly really looks cool for Arlecchino, and besides that, it is not really a good universal stat stick. Pretty much no other character can utilize the Bond of Life at all. If you're pulling for it, you're pulling for Arlecchino's damage as well as for the drip. And honestly, this is one of the weapon banners of all time. I mean, just look at these options. Hoiverse knew that this is going to be a throwaway banner for people that are Arlecchino stands or Zhongli stands. So it's like, okay, we're going to get all the crap here, throw all the crap into one set of banners, That way we can stack the next few banners to improve sales. And that's where, you know, the 4-star weapon options on this thing are something else. Dockhand's Assistant, HP scaling sword, useful on Furina a bit, but not the best because the Elemental Master says a bit wasted, although the energy is nice on her. But these days I just like using Favonius on Furina. As for Nilo, big meh, energy is meh, Elemental Mastery is pretty meh, HP is nice, but now it competes with the free-to-play friendly craftable Serendi's Call. Up next we have the Portable Power Saw, which provides HP percent. Enough said, out of the Claymore characters, only Dea scales off of HP percent really, so yeah. Dragon's Bane, a standard polearm. It's okay, but it's a standard polearm weapon, so that means that you can get it on any banner. And Sacrificial Fragments is also a standard 4-star weapon, meaning you can get this on any banner as well. While it is good, I do not recommend targeting standard banner 4-star weapons because you're very, very likely to get these weapons by just pulling on literally any other banner. So yeah, overall, these are some of the banners of all time. They kind of did Arlecchino dirty here. But hey, let me know what you guys think about these banners down in the comments below. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Want to Lose, signing out.